This is the greatest financial experiment in human history. And most people don't even realize they're living inside of it. Global debt, public, private, household, corporate, has exploded to levels no civilization has ever carried before. Today, governments borrow trillions as if it were nothing. Central banks print money with keystrokes. Families take out 30-year mortgages as casually as buying groceries. And yet, we still talk as if debt were something normal, harmless, and permanent. The truth is more unsettling. Debt has always been a tool of power, a weapon of control, and a ticking time bomb waiting for the right spark. The real question is not if this mountain of global debt will cause a crisis, but when, and WHO will pay the price when the system resets. To understand how we got here, we must go back to the roots of debt itself. Debt is as old as civilization. The first clay tablets in Mesopotamia were not poetry, but ledgers, records of who owed whom. In early societies, debt was not just economic. It was sacred. Priests and kings oversaw debts, and sometimes forgave them in sweeping jubilees, erasing obligations to keep the social order from collapsing. Imagine that for a moment. The very idea that society's survival required hitting a reset button on the financial system. Debt was power, but too much debt was a danger. Ancient rulers understood what modern leaders pretend to forget. You could not enslave an entire population with obligations forever. At some point, the system cracks. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and the rise of banking families. Debt evolved from grain and cattle, to gold and credit. Kings and popes borrowed enormous sums to wage wars and fund empires. But debt always carried risk. Spain, flushed with silver, declared bankruptcy 4 times in the 16th century. That is the first lesson. Even empires stuffed with gold can drown in debt when ambition outpaces reality. Debt was no longer just personal, it was geopolitical. It fueled wars, toppled dynasties, and redrew maps. The modern debt explosion began in the 20th century. After World War I, nations carried debts so enormous that repayment seemed impossible. Germany was saddled with reparations so crushing that the hyperinflation of the early 1920s, where Germans carried wheelbarrows of paper marks to buy bread, was the direct consequence. Debt was not just an accounting problem, it was the fuel of chaos. Then came 1944 and the Bretton Woods Conference. The moment the modern financial system was engineered. The United States, holding 2/3 of the world's gold, set the rules. The dollar became the anchor, convertible to gold. The idea was stability, the reality was dependence. But the temptation to borrow, to spend beyond one's means, never goes away. By the 1960s, the US printed more dollars than it had gold. Foreign governments noticed. In 1971, Richard Nixon slammed the door, ending the dollar's link to gold. Debt was now untethered. That moment was the quiet revolution. It transformed debt from something finite into something infinite. With gold gone, central banks discovered they could manipulate interest rates. When crisis hit, more debt was created to patch the hole. Each rescue required more leverage than the last. The 2008 financial crisis was not simply about housing. It was about debt layered upon debt, a pyramid of leverage so vast that when a single corner crumbled, the whole structure shook. Mortgages were packaged, insured, and amplified by leverage ratios of 30:1. Here was the bitter irony. Those who borrowed recklessly were rescued with trillions in bailouts, while ordinary citizens were left with unemployment, foreclosures, and austerity. Debt was revealed not as a neutral instrument, but as a system rigged to protect the powerful. Since then, the numbers have gone from alarming to surreal. Global debt has tripled in the last 2 decades, reaching more than $300 trillion by 2023. That is nearly 4 times the size of the global economy. The United States adds trillions every year with barely a debate. The whole system is a giant balancing act, where stability depends on the illusion that debt can expand forever without consequence. But debt always has consequences. It enslaves future generations. Every dollar borrowed today is a claim on tomorrow's work. And when the numbers grow too large, repayment becomes impossible. History is filled with defaults, restructurings, and crises. Debt always ends one of 3 ways. You pay it back honestly, you inflate it away, or you default. No empire, no system has ever escaped that truth. The consequences are everywhere, but most people don't see them because debt has become invisible. When your government runs a deficit, it quietly builds a tab in your name. When you swipe a credit card, you're not paying. You're borrowing. The system thrives on leverage. But leverage works like gravity. It feels weightless on the way up, and crushing on the way down. The U.S. national debt passed $34 trillion in 2024. Interest payments alone now rival defense spending. The world's largest superpower is borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money it already borrowed. The trap is psychological. Politicians love debt because it buys time. Borrowing seems painless. The illusion works, until it doesn't. When interest rates rise, exactly what we've seen since 2022, the burden suddenly becomes visible. Debt is like a sleeping predator. Harmless while it rests, deadly when it awakens. Yet, debt continues to be sold as a path to prosperity. This is the great lie of modern finance, that debt is free, infinite, and safe. History screams the opposite. What comes next? There are only a few escape routes. The signs point toward inflation as the preferred path, silently reducing the value of what's owed by debasing the currency. When prices rise 10%, your savings lose 10% of their power, but your government's debt shrinks by the same measure. It is a hidden tax, and it is politically easier than default. Central banks may posture about fighting it, but debt-laden governments need it. They need the erosion of real value to make their obligations bearable. That means ordinary citizens. You will carry the cost. Your savings, your wages, your future purchasing power will be drained to preserve the system. It is the oldest trick in the book. Debt is not just economics. It is about power. The powerful rarely pay. Banks are bailed out. Corporations restructure. Politicians retire. Ordinary people, meanwhile, lose homes, jobs, and hope. That is why understanding debt is not just financial education. It is survival. First, strip away the illusions. Understand that debt is not neutral. Second, recognize the historical pattern. No empire, no nation, no system has escaped a reckoning. Third, protect yourself. That means building real wealth that isn't entirely at the mercy of paper promises, knowledge that cuts through the lies, perspective that keeps you from falling for the same old tricks. This is the lesson of history. Debt builds, leaders deny, crises erupt, and societies reset. The only choice you have is whether you face that cycle blind or awake. Global debt is not just a number on a spreadsheet. It is the shadow that looms over our future. And unless we learn, it will crush us the same way it has crushed every empire before.